episode of PEEPanEIP, an EIP dedicated series where we discuss an Ethereum improvement proposal and understand how it is going to make Ethereum even better. My name is Pooja Ranjan and I'm your host for today's episode on EIP-1474 Remote Procedure Call Specification. Ethereum is the biggest blockchain with several nodes running on different clients, but there is no formal Ethereum RPC specification, at least not in the final state yet. This proposal aims to standardize a specification to provide developers with a predictable Ethereum RPC interface regardless of underlying node implementation. EIP-1474 is a standard track interface proposal proposed in October 2018 and currently in draft status. This is an active discussion, and the Ethereum OSS team started to push the standardization with monthly meetings since January 2021. There is also a discussion channel on ETH R&D Discord for people interested. They can share their thoughts there. To talk about the proposal, our guests are Erik Marks, one of the authors of the proposal, and Marius, who is also the developer at Go Ethereum. We are also joined by Tomasz from Nethermind, Richard Moore from Ethereum.js, along with William Schwab, Brent Alsop from the Ethereum Catalyst team. For those who aren't aware, Erik has also co-authored EIP-3085 wallet add Ethereum chain RPC method and was on our show 2 weeks ago. So if you have missed watching the talk, you may follow the recording available on PEEPanEIP playlist at Ethereum Catalyst. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest. Thanks for joining, Erik and Marius. Maybe have a quick intro and then we will proceed with the presentation and the discussion.
Thank you, Pooja, and sure. Although I was, as you said, recently on the show, my name's Erik Marks. I'm a developer at Metamask. Started there as an intern in 2018 and have been full-time since 2019. And I suppose Marius, if you also want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name's Marius. I recently, like 1 year ago, joined the Go Ethereum team. And yeah, so I'm working on the client, different stuff there. That's basically it.
So thank you for the introduction. So how do we want to go?
I'm going to introduce the EIP and talk a little bit about the JSON RPC API, like what it is, and so forth. And then I'll let Marius talk about it from his perspective. And then we have a lot of people with a vested interest in moving this proposal forward and interesting perspectives on it as well. So hopefully proceeding to interesting discussion from there. But I'll begin by just sharing my screen. Yeah, I don't have any slides today because there isn't really much slide-worthy information necessarily that isn't encompassed by the proposal itself. So the IP is, as we've said, 1474. It was originally written by Paul Beauchamp, who was a part of Metamask, but as far as I know, is no longer working in Ethereum or cryptocurrencies generally. We at Metamask, we decided to that we wanted to create this EIP because there existed no standard or even EIP attempting to standardize the Ethereum JSON RPC API. And so what is the Ethereum JSON RPC API? So here is the Metamask sort of test dApp that we use internally for testing, also available on GitHub for anyone that wants to use it. And so when you, for instance, connect to Metamask from a dApp, you get a confirmation in Metamask, and like the site gets your accounts. You can call this method called ETH accounts. You can send ETH, deploy contracts, do all of that stuff. What it's using under the hood, for those of you that are not familiar with this, is a JSON RPC API. So it looks something like this. You type in you specify a method like so. This is the object that MetaMask injects into web pages that we make our RPC API available over. You call this request method that sends a JSON RPC request, which looks like this. It has a method property and optionally some parameters. This particular method doesn't have any parameters. So you send that and then you get a response. And so some of these methods, some of the methods that you can request here are specific to MetaMask. So we call those, part of the wallet. So they're not a part of the client, the Ethereum client JSON RPC API, which is like the actual Ethereum node that verifies new blocks and submits transactions to the network. That has its own JSON RPC API, and that is what EIP-1474 is all about. So it was, as we've mentioned, created in 2018, and it basically tried to just write the specification based on the existing implementation of these methods in Geth, Go Ethereum, and Parity at the time, and specify, what parameters do they take, if any, and what do they return. And so each method is defined something like this. Some are prefixed with Web3. Most of them are prefixed with ETH. So this is the method for getting the balance of an address. And so you have to submit an address as the first parameter and a block number as the second parameter. And then you send a RPC request like so, and you get a response back with the result, which in this case is the balance of that address as a hexadecimal string. And the problem with 1474 is at the time when it was written, it never, because the JSON RPC API is used by the basically entire Ethereum ecosystem. There are lots of different stakeholders with an interest in how these methods are implemented and how they work. And when 1474 was first written, none of the client teams became involved in trying to drive the standard forward. And those are sort of probably the most important people to get on board in order to actually standardize the API that ultimately they implement. I mentioned that from MetaMask perspective, there are some RPC methods that are implemented directly in MetaMask and some that are implemented by the Ethereum clients. And for the ones that are implemented by the clients, we just route those messages to the clients, then get a response back, and then return that to the website that requested it. So 1474 is currently out of date. It needs to be updated. It's unclear, it's not completely clear that the current format of the proposal is what we would want to finalize. It is also, I believe that currently the resource that I've been using personally when I need to check out a JSON RPC method, I go to ETH-Wiki, and it has the JSON RPC API page. But I was recently told that even this is not completely up to date with the latest implementations in Geth, and it's also missing some important methods like ETH_chain-ID, which was finalized by EIP-1474. That brings us to another open question that we'll hopefully get to talk to a little bit during this call, which is, when we define a new RPC method, how do we ensure that it gets included in 1474 or whatever EIP number eventually becomes finalized, and how do we make sure that the client teams are involved and that they are committed to implementing the method. And so the fact that there isn't a standard for this API means that historically there have been implementation difference between different clients. There are certainly implementation differences for different wallets. And so standardizing this API is something the entire ecosystem would benefit from. And I'll let Marius speak to it from the perspective of Go Ethereum.
Thank you, Erik. Yeah, I'm trying to share my screen. So I made some slides. They're not the best slides. I hope you can see them. So yeah, so the JSON RPC standard, a bit of history. I looked a bit around in the code, and I've seen that like the earliest JSON RPC methods were implemented in 2015. They've been continuously updated whenever like a new EIP introduces some new functionality or something, and we need a RPC method for that. Then it was implemented, and yeah, there's no formal standardization process until like 2 years ago. What's really interesting, we have like 10 different modules. So we have different modules in Go Ethereum for different functionality. We have, for example, the miner module, which provides access to like start miner, stop miner, something like this. We have the personal module, which provides access to the wallet, or TX pool for inspecting the current mempool. And we need private and public APIs. So we have these modules. We have these modules because some of these APIs you don't really want to like open them up for everyone to consume. So for example, if your node is online and you want to let other people query your node for current TX pool, for example, or something, then you don't really want to also let them send transactions or sign transactions over your node. So we have different namespaces. And just as an example, there are like 110 methods only in the ETH and the debug namespace. And we also have some problems with overlapping methods. For example, we have ETH sign, personal sign, and then sign transactions, once in ETH, in the ETH module, once in the personal module. And they are a bit different, but yeah, there are several instances of that. Why did we choose JSON RPC in the first place? I think it's really important for Ethereum nodes to have a human readable format. It makes it easier for people to write curl requests and send like easy requests to the, or handwritten requests to the node, which is nice. And also it makes debugging a lot easier. JSON RPC also has a lot of established tooling around it and is compatible with most current languages. There's a discussion to be had about changes in the dialog protocol. So there are queries that are pretty heavy. For example, if I ask you, give me the state at block X, or trace me this transaction. So execute the transaction and show me every state that this transaction executed, or every opcode, every function that it called. These queries can be quite heavy. However, they are not really encoding heavy. So the heaviness is basically on the node, and there is some discussion to be had about the dialog protocol. For example, for caching certain queries or something. But I think in general, we all agree that JSON RPC is the best format for Ethereum right now. JSON RPC in Geth, you have 2 ways to consume it, either via HTTP WebSocket or IPC. So if you start your node with Geth -- HTTP or Geth -- WebSocket, then you can send as Erik already said, you can just use curl or send your JSON to your node. And what you also have, you have JavaScript console, which is a JavaScript runtime environment, which is started whenever you specify Geth console. And you can also call these methods via the console. And this is also important that we keep this functionality. So a bit about our requirements. We of course need an open standard. Something that is important for us is that it's quickly extendable if needed. So for example, in the Berlin fork, we're going to introduce this access list format. So we need a new RPC call to create these access lists. And often you have a new feature, a new idea, a new feature request. So I'm not sure if personally, I'm not sure if the EIP process is the right process for extending this standard, because the EIP process tends to be a little bit slow. Maybe we should have another process for that, but that's just my personal opinion. We also need these separate modules, because like a lot of people are using Geth nodes for their JSON RPC API. A lot of people are exposing their APIs to the network, which can have catastrophic consequences. I know that bank chain lost some money because they unlocked their account and someone sent some transactions over their JSON RPC API. What's really lacking in the current standard is error handling. So this is a personal issue of mine, that currently there's not really a way for, and I think Rick from Ethos will agree, there's currently not really a way to check which error occurred other than like comparing for the error message, which in turn means if we're updating our error messages, we're going to break stuff out there, and this is really bad because it impacts us in a way that like it's not really good. It forces us into this small design space. So a solid error handling is something we would really like to see from this new standard. I know that 1474 had already some ideas about error handling, but I think we can improve them even more. And we need some client-specific methods. For example, we have debug.start CPU profile, which and start and stop CPU profile, which starts CPU profiling our node. I think in the end, it would be okay if we have Geth.start CPU profile instead of debug.start CPU profile. But I think it is important also for like retaining client diversity that we have client-specific methods, which would also enable us to quickly extend our own implementation if we find something. Right now, it's often so that if we have a new function or new use case, then it will end up either in debug or in ETH, depending on what we think, what makes more sense. So yeah. And then a test harness would be really good. Right now, there are static and dynamic tests on Hive that in theory test the JSON RPC. Some of them are broken and they are also pretty Geth specific. So in the future, I think we already talked about that in the JSON standardization calls, that we want to have a common test harness. Now I wanted to show you a bit how the workflow works if you want to implement a new method. For that, I have it here on the slides, but I think I have enough time to also show it to you live. So if you have a new method here, you can, for example, I want to create an access list. You implement the access list in some file somewhere, and now you have to go to ETH API.go, and basically you have these public debug API objects or private debug API objects, and you can create a new method there that, for example, creates the access list. So you can create the access list, you give it a block hash, you give it a number if you want to, an optional number, and you give it a transaction. And it will basically create the access list for this transaction for you. And now you have to, if you want to now have it in JSON RPC, you have to go to the internal Web3 extension and add a new method here. And that's basically it. That's how you implement a new JSON RPC method, which is pretty easy. And if you want to go one step further, we also have this ETH client, which is basically the way to call these JSON RPC methods from out of Go. And so they wrap the JSON RPC API as a client from Go. And you can also implement your thing here. And then I don't know if I have the time, but I'm going to do it anyway. If I now start a Geth node, I can use our new API, newly created debug.accesslist, .create. Sorry, debug.create access list, and it will create you an access list. Unfortunately, because you don't, like, there's an issue with the creation right now, but it will give you out the access list. So yeah, so if you ever want to implement a RPC method in one of the clients or in Geth, I just showed you how to do that. Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation and introducing the proposal, Erik and Marius. First, I would like to give this opportunity to other participants if they have any questions.
I think actually, if I could even maybe try and direct Tomasz as a lead director of a client, I'm interested just to hear what your feedback is about the EIP in general, maybe about Nethermind's implementation of the RPC vis-a-vis the EIP and what your thoughts are in general. Maybe you could kick that off.
Sorry, I've heard that Nethermind name was mentioned, but I kind of didn't hear the first half of the sentence. But so if
sure, I could repeat that, no problem. Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe you could kick us off a little bit with your thoughts as a lead developer of a client, your thoughts on
sure.
the EIP or how Nethermind itself looks at the RPC.
Yeah, I think that when looking at the Geth implementation, there's lots of similarities of how we see about like what kind of complexities adding new JSON RPC methods can cause. And there's not that many. I mean, like it seems to be generally by most of the clients supported as either plugins or simple code modifications. We've all built some kind of modules features here, so JSON RPC is definitely friendly for users, and we've seen many discussions around, oh, when you have JSON RPC, should you replace it with something more performant like protobufs or gRPC? or should you replace it with some different format or whatever? And it comes back over and over again because of Ethereum 2 choosing different formats, because of trying to standardize and asking people before standardizing whether they would like to go to other format. But we see that quite a lot of people say that it's actually, they like it that it's human readable, that they like it that it's reasonably simple, even if it's not most efficient, because this is created for integrations, for quick dynamic integrations. And it's also very consistent with the approach from crypto community. Like I never use it myself, but I've heard that Bitcoin uses JSON RPC as well for most of this integration. So it seems very natural choice. Sorry if I say too much here, but also come from different angles. So we work on this standardization effort by Ethereum Oasis on JSON RPC, and being fully aware of EIP-1474 was there, and thinking of how not to repeat that effort and how to just improve it. We treat EIP-1474 as the basis for everything that we do. So first of all, it introduces the agreement on all the basics. So like what quantities, how is hash represented, how are the numbers represented, how are the error codes returned, and so on. And then it goes by presenting various methods. I think the Ethereum Oasis discussion with multiple teams ends up with the approach when 1474 is this meta EIP that describes all the things that are reusable by all the different modules and methods. But what we also want to deliver is every single method to have its own specification, because we've seen that trying to describe JSON RPC as a whole or as a module by module ends up having those differences between clients standing in the way of just achieving something simple and just clear and something that everyone agrees on. So yeah, sorry, I listened to this one. I'm really interested, and I think it's amazingly well-written EIP, but also tackling the complexity of having to describe everything with all those clients' differences.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. That the current EIP tries to do everything, and it's hard for everyone to agree on everything. That's why I said that maybe the EIP process. Yeah, of course we can create a single EIP for like every RPC call, but that will quickly get out of hand, I think. So if we like standardize like 100, 200 RPC calls, so that's why I think we should have the discussion whether we really want to like standardize these calls through the EIP process, or whether we should maybe have a different process for that.
I think that is, to me, a very interesting question. And speaking from like the perspective of Metamask, we've ended up in situations where we've wanted to add a new feature. Like most recently, we add the ability for dApps to suggest EVM chains to add to the user's wallet. And that's the aforementioned EIP 3085. And we chose to implement that as we chose to create a JSON RPC method in the wallet underscore namespace in order to do that. And, you know, if we decided to create the IP because we wanted to, you know, create a standard that all wallets could target and implement, but at the same time, we're a product that has like users, and we have a product roadmap, and we cannot possibly be held up by the EIP process every time we want to like do something. That's just like unsustainable, and that's untenable. And so I'm completely sympathetic to the point that like from the perspective of any client team, like waiting for an EIP to go from draft to final is just not going to happen, because presumably you guys are just going to go and implement the thing when you need to, regardless of what the EIP process is doing, if we're being realistic. So I think in my mind, the status of living EIPs is a bit of an underexplored space. So I'm wondering if, because in my mind, the biggest thing for an EIP standardizing the JSON RPC API, the biggest problem for it to solve is like, how do we change it? How do we add new things to it? How do we make alterations to existing methods? And how can we do that while still allowing client teams to work without having to wait like 6 months for the thing to become finalized or whatever. Those are my thoughts on that point anyway.
I quickly want to address this one thing, the issues with the process that has surfaced here. Yeah, I mean, we are trying to improve the EIP process, and there is a group, specifically EIP-IP group. We are actually considering collecting all the grievances and issues that has been faced by either the author or the client team, get it fixed and improve the new process. But for now, I can just, for this specific, this EIP, I can say that we will try to push it through the EIP standardization process as fast as possible.
I mean, I guess what I'd point out also is that we take a look at the EIP process, as is well known, there's the different tracks inside the EIP process. So on the one hand, we've got the core EVM EIPs, where any EVM will have a specific amount of opcodes. No client can implement additional opcodes, and they all must have all of the opcodes that are present. But when you take a look at something like the ERC track or the standards, so if somebody has an extension that they want to put on ERC20, they don't need to make a new EIP for that. They don't need anybody's permission. Listening to the conversation here, it would seem that networking or the JSON RPC in general probably falls into some kind of middle ground. Would there be a way to find some kind of maybe lowest common denominator? EIPs that represent any client will have these RPC calls and will make these calls these ways, but that in a way that doesn't mean that these are the only JSON RPC calls that a client could have. That way you give the clients their flexibility. They can put in their independent calls. They have their independent ways of doing things, but there's also kind of just the foundation of the basics there for anybody else who's implementing a new client or who wants to know how to make certain calls.
I just wanted to agree with the EIP process is really cumbersome for stuff like this. And like historically, everything was done through the EIP process. And then recently we realized that the hard fork coordination stuff that goes decisions onto mainnet doesn't really fit in the EIP process. And so what we haven't done yet is figure out kind of what's in between and what fits where. And at least for me, like it sounds like JSON RPC or networking stuff is very mainnet specific, not really general standard specific. And so some other place and other way to do it entirely would be totally appropriate. And I'd like to hear kind of more ideas on what that could be or where that could live, just like completely free up the process entirely.
Yeah, I think there's so far this agreement on middle ground looks like not a single client thinks that it should be a set in stone set of the methods. We want to have that flexibility, and I think every single client has some methods that will never be re-implemented anywhere else because they're specific for the client. And they're not necessarily in the client name modules like Geth underscore, Nethermind underscore. They might be interweaved with other things. What we found important was to provide standardization for those calls that have been in use for 4 years in major integrations, but still cause trouble to the integrators because there are some minor edge case differences between various clients. I think there's great examples are if you're sending ETH estimate gas without the from field or the gas price field specified or the gas limit specified, what the gas limit is assigned to the transaction, what timeouts will happen, what is it a system account used or a zero account used as a from field. So those things are not specified now in any place. And when you implement a new client, you have to extract that information, and much of it you only discover when users start to report that to you. And then when they report it to you, your first impression is that you actually does seem to be behaving okay, very intuitive from your perspective, but you just see that it doesn't behave exactly the same as other clients, and it causes a massive trouble to users. So that's the direction for this pair methods EIP specification, where you know that the effort required for EIP process is worth it because the method is used so much and it causes so much troubles. But for the new things, definitely we don't want to go for EIP.
What do you think the biggest challenge with regards to its implementation is going to be, or reaching a consensus? Do you think it's going to be hard for all clients to agree on a standard?
I think more the discovery of all of these things and just describing them later and making sure that, as you said, that it may get out of control. That's what Marius said, is if we end up with 80 IPs for 80 different methods, it may be a bit too much. So maybe we'll stop after 10 or 20 and we'll say, these were so important that actually that's what everyone wanted when they were saying JSON RPC standard. Because we keep saying JSON RPC standard we need, but maybe we simply need the 10, 20, 30 most basic methods, and everything else can have this minor differences. So challenging is the discovery of all the differences, making sure that you're not missing it, and showing everyone how this process looks and just delivering it. Implementation-wise, rarely this causes a lot of trouble, I think, unless these are some very complex methods like debug tracing, but yeah.
I agree with the points raised by Marius and Tomasz here, that basically ultimately the implementations by the client teams will end up driving the standard forward for new additions and future changes. I think that's basically unavoidable, regardless of how we would like a standardization process to work. I also want to emphasize that I don't, my previous comments were not meant as a criticism of the EIP process per se. I just think it is fundamentally a hard problem to herd all of these cats, as it were. There's no process we can create that is going to solve the problem of coordinating between all of these different stakeholders in this API. And I do like the idea of basically identifying the things that we absolutely need to standardize and standardizing those. I think one thing that I'd be interested in exploring is, what if we created a I don't know if does the EIP process specify how a living standard is updated?
Yes, actually, as of now, we have only one living standard, that is the EIP-1. Other than that, there is no other. And according to the current process, it is considered to be living because it's never going to get a final standard and actively under review all the time, kind of.
Mm-hmm. So it's basically like authors create PRs for it, and then an editor has to approve it in order for it to be merged.
Yeah, it's not only authors; anybody can go ahead and create a pull request.
Yeah, and there isn't anything dictated as to this is the process of how you update EIP-1, or which is the only living EIP. It's just that it exists in a living state, and then you can edit it, and it's about a statement long.
Right. So I mean, maybe one thing for this effort led primarily by Tomasz to standardize the JSON RPC API. If there is a standard, the thing to figure out is how do we update that standard, and when do we update that standard, and who gets to choose how the standard is updated.
Okay. Definitely, I'll be bringing it up in the EIP-AP meeting, whatever the concerns we have discussed here. But I would quickly like to get some thoughts of Richard here from the perspective of API providers. Obviously, this EIP-1474 reaching final status will be helpful for all developers, Ethereum developers working on any of the Ethereum clients. But because it is an interface proposal and you're from the Ethers.js, that is an API provider, what advantage do you see from EIP-1474 getting into the final? I mean, is there any specific that you would like to talk about? That's number one. And number two is like anything else that you would like to see before it can go ahead with the next status of the EIP standardization.
Hi, I'm looking forward to it. It's it would be great if there was some way to pull these. I'm not sure if we were discussing about the open JSON RPC. There's some sort of description of the description for how these JSON RPC methods work, and it would make things much easier to pull those in and just be off to the races. For example, Ethers in a lot of places will convert chain ID into a number, and it will convert gas limit into a big number. So I think by having this sort of description, it might be easier to programmatically make those type of bindings where it produces what makes sense. So for the things that are common, like get transaction by hash, get block, I have my own hard-coded do this, do that, and do this other thing. But when new things come along, like get proof, this is something that would have to be added manually by me if it was to be supported across the board. With something like this, it'd be great because I could theoretically just kind of, so if I'm using a proxy, I'm not sure how technical JavaScripty people are here, but you can imagine calling a brand new method on an Ethers provider object that simply I was unaware of. Because everything returns a promise, everything is deferred and asynchronous anyways, it could fetch this description, figure out what the description is trying to do, and provide meaningful information. And the user wouldn't even know this was happening. It would just, the developer wouldn't even know that it was reconstructing the provider as it went along to be able to support this new interesting call. Now, eventually somebody's going to have some sort of weird edge case where the description doesn't quite match the right thing. So chain ID, for example, is right now a number. It might detect it as a big number. And so those sorts of tweaks might need to happen. But it would save, I don't know if saving is the right word. I feel like it would mean I could interoperate with things that I didn't even know existed in a meaningful sense, at least until people complained saying, oh, this is a little bit not what I expected. Can you make it do this? Then I can go through and add the special custom thing that makes the world happy. Yeah, so I mean, I'm a big proponent of these type of standards in general. The other really big area I'm looking forward to is having standardized errors. Right now, when I get an error in Ethers, I do a ton of string replacements, a bunch of like regexes on it, because parity versus Etherscan versus whatever version of parity or Etherscan, or sorry, parity or Geth Alchemy is running, the strings are slightly different. And Etherscan has their own special APIs. So I have this list of like 20 strings I'm searching through. Does the word insufficient balance occur? Is there too little balance for this operation to occur? Like I have to find all these different things so that I can feed back to the user a consistent error. Because at the end of the day, people using Ethers don't want to have to replicate these 20 strings that might happen because they used inferior today and alchemy tomorrow. So getting like a standard run errors is like probably the biggest thing in my mind that I'm looking forward to. I'm not sure if I exactly answered the question I was asked, but feel free to like ask more or whatever. I can talk about a lot of things. So
yeah, I'm sure that is going to be helpful. Anyone would like to address this thing?
Yeah, so I think what I'm looking forward to the most is next to errors, just as Rick already said. I think testing. So that would be a really good thing for us, because right now there are some testing frameworks for our current JSON RPC. But of course they are like handwritten and only written by us in basically our free time. So I think if we have these standards, it would be really easy for anyone and for all the teams to write tests that can be used by everyone else. So I think that's what I'm really looking forward next to the errors.
Sounds good. But if I understand correct, like at this stage, this EIP-1474, it is all good to go in the next stages, status of the EIP standardization. It's just that we are looking for some more improvements, which may be, we can bring it with the help of some other proposal or the improvements later on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, as I mentioned in the beginning, out of date to an unknown extent, and it's missing a couple of methods that have since become de facto standards or like widely proliferated through the ecosystem. And that kind of brings me to the point I was raising my hand for just now, which is, and Marius kind of alluded to it by saying, that we basically did in our free time, because the problem is, like, regardless of what the standardization process is, actually sitting down and creating this standard and like getting into the headspace of it and not being distracted by 50 different things while doing it, it's like a full-time job to drive any complicated Ethereum standard through to the end. When we were standardizing the Ethereum provider API, which is an effort that on this call, Rikmo in particular was involved with, I had to spend a ton of my time, while I would have, maybe liked to be like writing code for Metamask, working on the standards process. And like, ultimately, like, I enjoyed it and the work was useful, but it does take effort. So I think, I'm like, who in the ecosystem could fund someone to just work on getting the standard written and like coordinate between the different client teams full time? Because I think, and to some extent, it is like a question that could be solved by, funding someone who's passionate about it, but might not, otherwise have the time or the resources to work on it for free. Because I think, there's the number of people that could like own driving this standard forward and have the time and resources to do it. It's not a lot of people on the face of the earth that are suitable, like have the suitable skill sets to do that.
On that note, actually, so I feel like that's the thing. Basically, doing an EIP is a tremendous amount of effort, and I do find that there's often a lot of weird roadblocks and people saying things and pushing back on things that maybe, basically, we want to make it easier and more friendly for the EIP process to move forward. But one thing, especially for 1193, we almost need like some sort of person who's hired just as a morale booster, because no matter what you say, you're going to have people are either really happy about it or really, really angry that you're not doing X, Y, or Z. And you almost need someone to like pat you on the back saying like, it's okay. There's just one person there or four people, they're hating on it for whatever reason or whatever. We also need that. We need some sort of like way to make it more inviting to actually want to work on the EIP. I feel like any EIP I put forward, it's almost more animosity in than there is any sort of like people seeing the utility and praising you for it. Is very much that's a stupid idea. I had this idea a long time ago and it was better when I had this idea, but I'm not trying to sound bitter or spiteful or anything, but I think 1193 was an especially good example of how like a 4-year plus process, I feel like, of, well, what if we do this? And basically it just takes forever for wheels to turn and people to get discouraged. And once people are discouraged, the people who are running it kind of halts until the next DevCon, which is like, I have an idea, let's get back into this. And so I don't know what I'm really trying to say here, but we need basically hugs. We need some sort of like EIP hugs.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna raise this point. Maybe we could have a call, some kind of community call to discuss and collect on more feedback on that. But for now, let's get back to the EIP-1474. So, I would like to give a special mention of, the Ethereum OSS team. Thank you, Tomasz, for organizing ETH1.x JSON RPC API standard meetings. I think This is the first time in my experience that I have seen an organizer having meeting at 2 different times of the day to include participants from almost every time zone. I mean, that is fantastic. There was one meeting today. Unfortunately, I could not attend the first one. I'm planning to attend the later one. Could you briefly talk about a pull request, that is 3410, with respect to EIP-1474?
Yeah, so this is about the first guideline and an example of the method-specific EIP. So instead of approaching JSON RPC as a whole and standardizing it, we create a single template showing how to standardize properly with all the details a single method. And we pick a very simple one, which is if block number, and we show why we think that even on a single method level, it can be quite complex and demanding. So we had a 45 minutes call today where we started but haven't finished, and we'll continue with the Asia Pacific call, the standardization, and in 3-4-10, I think. Okay, I still don't remember this. I don't remember this number yet because it just been done today. So we ask a question: what does it mean, the latest block number, from the perspective of different clients? And we already had all those questions about what does it mean during the fast sync? What does it mean in the archive sync? Is the latest block the one that we fully process or the one that we know about and we think is the best block on the network? So if block number is the one that doesn't have any problems about the structure of the call or the returned value format, because it's not a complex object, it's just a simple single number. So this was not a problem here, but we'll continue with another EIP that will show example of the if get transaction by hash, which will also show the guideline of how to provide the tooling for verification of the schema of the actual object, how it should be presented, which fields are required, which fields are optional, and so on. And probably at the end, we'll pick up a complex one like ETH call that will also cover how the edge cases, both edge cases in the business, from the business logic perspective, the ones that we mentioned before, like what happens if you don't include the from field? Is it actually required to include the from field? And also what the format of the response should be. Yeah, after we deliver all those 3 examples, then we hope that we can pass it either to community or we say there is funding for that. And I think there is funding actually for people that will follow this guideline to create it for the next 10, 20, up to possibly 60 different RPC methods. And only then we can decide that we actually combine them back and maybe add them to EIP-1474. And yeah, just simplifying it, splitting it into small pieces, and then when we're happy with that, maybe making it a bigger standard.
Interesting. I mean, that seems like a good approach to put all the pieces of puzzles together, and then probably we'll have a better specification ready for end users. Happy to see this group is making good progress step by step. My next question is for Marius. It's related to implementation status on Geth specifically. As on date, Geth is the biggest client of Ethereum. So implementation of any of the proposal in Geth is like always helpful for EIP to move along the standardization. I know this is not a core proposal, so it will not go undergo the upgrade, the hard fork. So I'm just curious, like how historically have been Geth including any proposal for their client, like the current version of client, does it include this? Or if not, then what is the plan of including it in client specification?
Yeah, so from what I think happened, what I think Erik said is that they basically made the EIP after the specification, after the implementation. So they tried to specify what we already implemented. So basically everything that is in 1474 is already implemented in Geth. But of course we have maybe small differences in things. And also we have like a lot more than more methods, more calls than specified in 1474. And yeah, I think we should yeah, go ahead with this standardization process started by Oasis and then Nethermind to find like to specify everything and then maybe backport it to 1474. So I don't think that we should right now go ahead with 1474 in its current form, but we should update it later, maybe.
Okay, that sounds fair. I know we are almost at time, but I have just a couple of questions for the EIP author that is related to EIP status. The number one is like moving to review status, I think would be the ideal thing to do at this point of time if we want to move it along the EIP standardization process so that it can gain momentum and it can be pushed forward. As we know that EIP-1474 is also required by a handful of new proposals. Those are in draft status, like I was reading EIP-3045, 3046, that is for adding base fee by Abdel. And again, there was this new proposal for JSON RPC method to sign Ethereum message, that is EIP-3361, that also requires. So no need to mention that creating PR sooner rather than later will be helpful. As much as I understand, the priority of creating PR may not be something that is for developers. So as always, I'll be happy to engage cat herders if needed, but if you can go ahead and create the pull request, that would be helpful.
That makes sense. And I think James just suggested in the chat that moving it to review and then to living so that we can do the back. I mean, I think that makes sense because the point is like we don't want to go ahead, take 1474 as it is, finalize it and be like, that's the JSON RPC API, because we know that there are differences between the client implementations. And if we just finalize something that doesn't have any basis in reality, the client teams are just gonna ignore it. And so, but I think like keeping it as a living standard and, you know, basically trying to make it match reality after the fact. I mean, if we're, you know, obviously that's not how, maybe in an ideal world, how we do, how we would want to do standards, but in a realistically, that's pretty much what we're gonna end up doing anyway. And obviously, you know, nobody has based, Ethereum hasn't been stopped from progressing because 1474 hasn't been standardized up to this point, right? So I think, you know, getting it into a living status sooner, even with its present perfections and working on it over time, it makes sense to me. I'll be curious to see what the EIP editors and Micah in particular has to say about that, but we'll see, I suppose.
Sounds good. There is one last thing that I want to bring it here. It's not like a question. It's just something that I saw in the proposal, not sure if it relates to the present scenario. The mention of parity and let I don't know if they are still supporting Ethereum 1.0 chain. It's particularly in the implementation section of the proposal. So we might want to look into that, and if appropriate, might replace it with the current client like Nethermind base, so we can go ahead and add that too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely, that would definitely fall under the umbrella of things that are outdated about 1474 because it hasn't received a major update in some time.
All right. So we have hit the time, but I would like to just quickly ask if anybody has anything else that they would want to bring it up.
I just wanted to say good luck to you all because this seems like a real pain. So anyways.
This was really great. Thanks for suggesting to organize it in a different way, Erik. I'm glad we were able to bring most of the concerned participants on one call and we discussed it. This conversation was really wonderful and we came up with different suggestions, and maybe we'll end up having another living EIP. I'm not sure of that, but let's see how it turns out to be. Though this proposal is like, it seems that it still has to go a long way I'm expecting a continued exchange of information on ETH Magician page and maybe in the JSON RPC channel at the ETH R&D Discord that we have. I wish to see this proposal going on a fast track for standardization, although I don't know myself like what fast track means here. But my understanding it sooner it will reach to an appropriate status will be helpful for both the Ethereum client developers and the dApp developers for having a formal Ethereum RPC specification, which if needed can be modified through the process. I think this release of this episode may have cleared many doubts and answered many questions. On this note, for all our YouTube viewers, thanks for watching. If you have any questions that couldn't be answered, you may ask the guest. Their Twitter handle is provided in the description section. You can also share it with us on the ECH Discord. Hit like and share it with the people of similar interest. If you are a new viewer, don't forget to subscribe to Ethereum Cat Holders YouTube channel. We'd love to hear feedback and improvement suggestions to make this series even more knowledgeable for you. Do let us know which EIP would you like to see in the future episodes. Next week, we will be talking to Nick Johnson about ENS specification and wildcard resolution proposal EIP-1474. So stay tuned, keep watching, and keep sharing your love with Ethereum Cat Holders. This is all of us signing out.